The air in the executive suite of Sterling and Associates didn't smell like cinnamon or pine, despite the towering 20-foot Nordmann fir standing in the lobby. It smelled like expensive cologne, cold ambition, and the metallic tang of a winter storm brewing outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Manhattan. I stood at my desk, my fingers trembling slightly, as I organized the final quarterly reports for Arthur Sterling, the man who had been my boss, my mentor, and my silent tormentor for the last 5 years. To the rest of the world, Arthur was the visionary CEO, the man with the Midas touch, and a devoted family man who appeared on the covers of business magazines with his perfect wife and 2 golden-haired children. To me, he was the man who made me work every Christmas Eve for half a decade, the man who took credit for my algorithmic breakthroughs, and the man who currently saw me as nothing more than a piece of office furniture that happened to speak. This year, however, the atmosphere felt different. The tension was thick, vibrating under the surface of the forced holiday cheer. I had spent months playing the role of the loyal, overworked assistant, the quiet mouse who saw everything and said nothing. I watched him funnel company funds into consulting fees that actually paid for a penthouse in Soho. I watched him delete emails that should have been archived. And most importantly, I watched him carry on a reckless, glowing affair with the daughter of the board's chairman, all while his wife sat at home planning their annual Christmas gala. The annual gift exchange at Sterling and Associates was legendary, but not for the reasons people thought. It was a calculated display of hierarchy. The senior VPs received Rolexes or keys to luxury SUVs. The middle managers got all expenses-paid trips to the Swiss Alps. And the support staff? We were reminded of our place. As I walked into the grand conference room for the appreciation ceremony, the irony of the name felt like a physical weight in my chest. Arthur stood at the head of the long mahogany table, a glass of vintage scotch in one hand, looking every bit the king of the mountain. He smiled at me, but the smile never reached his eyes. It was the smile a predator gives a prey that has finally stopped running. When it was my turn to receive my bonus, he didn't hand me an envelope or a velvet box. He pointed toward a small, crumpled brown paper bag sitting on the edge of the table. "For your tireless dedication, Elena," he said, his voice dripping with a condescending warmth that made my skin crawl. "I know how much you value practical things." I opened the bag in front of the entire executive board. Inside was a plastic, company-branded water bottle, one that was clearly a leftover from a trade show 3 years ago, and a $10 gift card to a coffee chain that didn't even have a location near my apartment. A ripple of stifled laughter moved through the room. I could see the VPs exchanging looks of pity masked by superiority. I felt the heat rise in my neck, but it wasn't the heat of shame. It was the heat of a fire that had been smoldering for 5 years, finally finding oxygen. Arthur laughed, a deep, boisterous sound that commanded the room. "Don't spend it all at once," he joked, turning his back on me to refill his drink. In that moment, the last shred of hesitation I had vanished. He thought I was a nobody. He thought my silence was a product of fear or stupidity. He didn't realize that for 5 years, I hadn't just been his assistant. I had been his archivist. I had every login, every deleted thread, every time-stamped photo of his business meetings at the Soho penthouse. I looked at the plastic water bottle in my hand and then at the giant digital screen behind him, which was currently displaying a slideshow of the company's Year of Integrity. The board members were all there, the very people who held the power to strip Arthur of his crown. The chairman, Mr. Harrison, was smiling at Arthur, unaware that his own daughter was the woman Arthur was using to satisfy his ego while mocking the very foundations of the company. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. Instead, I took a seat at the back of the room and waited. I watched as the champagne flowed and the executives patted themselves on the back for another year of record profits built on the backs of people they didn't even bother to learn the names of. I looked at my phone. The folder was ready. It was titled The Sterling Standard. It contained the wire transfers, the hotel receipts from business trips that coincided with Arthur's wife's birthday, and the high-resolution photos of Arthur and Chloe Harrison that I had taken from the shadows across the street. This wasn't just about a bad gift. The gift was simply the final piece of evidence that Arthur Sterling truly believed he was untouchable. He believed that people like me didn't have the courage to strike back. He believed that the glitter of the Christmas season would blind everyone to the rot at the core of his empire. But I knew the truth. The brighter the lights, the deeper the shadows. And I had been living in those shadows for a very long time. As the ceremony wound down, Arthur announced that he had a special surprise for the board, a preview of the new global expansion plan. He signaled for me to connect my laptop to the main projector. This was the moment. The room went dim, and the blue glow of the massive screen illuminated the faces of the most powerful people in the industry. Arthur stood by the screen, looking like a titan of industry, ready to claim his next victory. "Elena," he barked, not even looking at me. "Bring up the presentation." My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hand was steady. I didn't open the PowerPoint file. Instead, I opened the hidden directory. I looked at Arthur one last time. He was basking in the glow of the screen, his chest puffed out, a man who thought he had won. He had no idea that the trash he had given me was the spark that was about to burn his entire world to the ground. I clicked Select All and Play. The first thing that appeared on the screen wasn't a graph of projected growth. It was a crystal-clear image of Arthur Sterling in a passionate embrace with Chloe Harrison, dated just 3 nights ago, while he told the board he was in Chicago for a merger. The silence that fell over the room was louder than any explosion. It was the sound of a legacy shattering in the cold December air. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the air. Arthur's face transitioned from a smug, self-satisfied grin to a mask of sheer, pale horror in a matter of seconds. He frozen, his hand still holding the expensive Scotch glass halfway to his lips, staring at the 20-foot-tall projection of his own infidelity. It wasn't just a grainy photo. It was a high-definition betrayal. Beside him, Mr. Harrison, the chairman of the board, stood up so abruptly that his heavy mahogany chair screeched against the marble floor, a sound like a dying animal. His face turned a shade of crimson that rivaled the Christmas ornaments on the tree. "Is that my daughter?" Harrison whispered, his voice trembling with a lethal mixture of shock and burgeoning rage. Arthur finally found his voice, though it was thin and cracked. It's not what it looks like, Jim. This is a mistake. Elena, what are you doing? Turn it off. Turn it off right now." He lunged toward the laptop, but I had already stepped back into the shadows near the heavy velvet curtains, the remote clicker firmly in my hand. I didn't turn it off. I clicked the button for the next slide. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a dossier of professional and personal ruin. The next image was a scanned document, a wire transfer of $200,000 from the company's employee pension fund to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, dated the same day Arthur had denied the department's request for cost of living raises. "Check the destination account, Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice calm, echoing through the silent chamber. "You'll find it matches the lease agreement for a luxury suite in Soho, the one where Arthur and Chloe have been staying while they told you they were scouting new office locations in Europe." The board members, men and women who had spent their lives calculating risks and analyzing data, were now staring at the screen as if it were a portal to hell. The Year of Integrity slideshow had been replaced by a Year of Deception. Arthur was sweating now, the beads of moisture glistening under the harsh LED lights of the conference room. He looked less like a CEO and more like a cornered rat. "She's lying!" he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She's a disgruntled assistant. She's mentally unstable." I gave her a bonus today, and she's hallucinating. I smiled then, a cold, slow smile that felt like the first breath of fresh air I'd taken in years. I reached into the brown paper bag he had given me and pulled out the trade show water bottle. I held it up for everyone to see. A $10 gift card and a plastic bottle, I said, my voice gaining strength. That was my bonus for 5 years of 80-hour weeks, for 5 years of covering up your emergencies, for 5 years of watching you steal the brilliance of this team and claim it as your own. You didn't just give me a trash gift, Arthur. You gave me the final proof that you no longer saw me as a human being. And when you stop seeing someone as a person, you forget that they have eyes. You forget that they have ears. And you forget that they have the keys to your entire digital life. I clicked the remote again. A video began to play. It was a recording from the office's internal security system from 3 months ago, late at night. The audio was crisp. It showed Arthur in this very room, laughing with his CFO about how they were going to trim the fat by firing the veteran staff members just before their pensions vested, all while he planned a $1 million New York City New Year's Eve party for his elite friends. The room exploded into chaos. Mr. Harrison lunged for Arthur's throat, and several other board members had to restrain him. The CFO, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, tried to sneak toward the exit, but I had already called the building's security and the authorities. The police and the SEC are downstairs, by the way, I added, glancing at my watch. I sent them a digital copy of these files an hour ago. I figured they'd want to be part of the holiday festivities. Arthur sank into his chair, the same chair where he had sat like a king for so long. He looked small. He looked pathetic. The expensive suit and the vintage scotch couldn't hide the fact that he was a fraud. He looked at me, and for the first time in 5 years, he really saw me. He saw the woman he had underestimated. He saw the architect of his destruction. "Why?" he whimpered. "I gave you a job. I gave you a career." I walked over to the table and placed the plastic water bottle directly in front of him. "You gave me a job, Arthur, but you forgot to give me respect. And you forgot that in this building, I'm the one who knows where all the bodies are buried, because I'm the one who had to dig the graves for you." Outside, the snow began to fall more heavily, blanketing the city in a deceptive layer of white purity. Inside the Sterling and Associates boardroom, the atmosphere was anything but pure. It was a crime scene. I watched as the board members began to turn on each other, the fear of legal repercussions overriding their long-standing loyalties to Arthur. They were vultures, and now that the lion was wounded, they were ready to tear him apart to save themselves. I felt a strange sense of peace. For years, I had carried the weight of his secrets, the burden of his arrogance, and the sting of his dismissiveness. I had spent my Christmases alone, working on his projects, while he basked in the warmth of a life he didn't deserve. Now, as the clock ticked toward the end of the year, the scales were finally balancing. I looked at the gift card, the $10 for coffee, and I tossed it into the trash can. I didn't need his charity, and I certainly didn't need his appreciation. I had something much better. I had the truth, and I was about to watch it burn down the empire he thought was eternal. "The meeting is adjourned," I said, though I had no authority to say it. But in that moment, everyone listened. Even the chairman stopped shouting and looked at me. I wasn't just the assistant anymore. I was the witness, the judge, and the executioner. Arthur looked up at me, his eyes red and brimming with a desperate, pathetic plea. "Elena, please, we can talk about this. I'll give you anything. A promotion, a real bonus. Millions." I leaned in close to him, so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath and the sour scent of fear. "It's too late for a bonus, Arthur," I whispered. "The new year is coming, and in my world, the first thing we do is throw out the trash." I turned and walked toward the door, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. I didn't look back at the chaos, the screaming, or the man who had lost everything because he thought a plastic bottle was enough to buy a woman's soul. As I reached the elevator, I saw the security guards and the federal agents stepping out. I pointed toward the conference room and smiled. "He's all yours," I said. "Merry Christmas." The lobby of the Sterling building was a whirlwind of activity, but I moved through it like a ghost in a storm. As the federal agents swarmed the elevators, I walked out into the crisp, biting air of Manhattan. The city was glowing, draped in millions of lights, and for the first time in years, the cold didn't feel hostile. It felt like a baptism. I had orchestrated the perfect collapse. But the final act of this seasonal vengeance wasn't destined for a boardroom. It was destined for the grandest stage of all, the Sterling annual New Year's Eve Gala, held traditionally on the night of December 23rd to kick off the elite holiday season. Arthur had spent $3 million of company money he claimed didn't exist for staff raises, to rent out the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Temple of Dender. He wanted to usher in the new year as a god. I was going to make sure he was remembered as a ghost story. By the time the night of the gala arrived, the news of the boardroom massacre had been suppressed by the company's PR firm, kept under a temporary gag order while the lawyers scrambled. Arthur was out on bail, delusional enough to believe that if he showed up to his own party, he could project strength and convince the investors that the Elena incident was just a deep-fake smear campaign. He didn't realize that I hadn't just leaked the files to the SEC. I had programmed a timed release to every major news outlet and, more importantly, to every guest's smartphone at exactly 10:00 p.m. I arrived at the museum not as an employee, but as a guest. I wore a gown of midnight blue silk that cost more than my entire first year's salary, a gift to myself from the whistleblower bounty I had already secured through legal channels. I looked into the mirror and didn't see a victim. I saw the architect of a new era. The Temple of Dendur was breathtaking. Blue and gold lights danced off the water surrounding the ancient Egyptian stone. The who's who of the financial world was there, sipping champagne and laughing under the shadow of history. Arthur was there too, looking haggard despite his custom tuxedo. He was holding a glass of champagne, trying to charm a group of skeptical investors. When he saw me across the room, his face drained of what little color it had left. He tried to move toward me, perhaps to threaten me or to beg one last time, but the crowd was too dense. I simply raised my glass to him, a silent toast to the end of his world. I checked my watch. 9:59 p.m. The air in the room felt electric, a physical vibration before the lightning strike. I stood near the podium where Arthur was scheduled to give his Vision of the Future speech. At exactly 10:00 p.m., the sound started. It wasn't a scream or an explosion. It was the synchronized ping and buzz of 500 smartphones. One by one, the elite of New York pulled their devices from their pockets and evening bags. I watched the transformation of the room in real time. The laughter died. The faces of the socialites and billionaires twisted into expressions of disgust and shock. They weren't just looking at the affair or the wire transfers anymore. They were looking at the trash files, a compilation of every disparaging comment Arthur had ever made about the very people in this room. He had called the chairman a senile relic, the lead investors gullible sheep, and his own wife a necessary tax deduction. The betrayal was now universal. Arthur reached the podium, oblivious for a few seconds longer, tapping the microphone to get everyone's attention. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice booming through the speakers, "as we look toward a new year of unprecedented growth." He stopped. He finally noticed that no one was looking at him with admiration. They were looking at him with a hatred so pure it was audible. Mr. Harrison stepped forward, not with a glass of champagne, but with a printed copy of the Soho penthouse lease that had just landed in his inbox. "You used my daughter, Arthur." Harrison's voice was amplified by the silence of the hall. "You used this company, and you used every person in this room." Arthur looked down at his own phone, which was vibrating uncontrollably on the lectern. He saw his world dissolving in the palm of his hand. He looked at me, standing at the base of the temple, the blue light making me look like a vengeful deity. "You," he choked out into the microphone. "You did this." I stepped forward, my voice clear and unwavering. "No, Arthur, you did this. You thought that because you were at the top, the people at the bottom didn't matter. You thought you could give a woman a piece of trash and expect her to thank you for the privilege of being stepped on." I walked up the steps of the podium, and for the first time in my life, Arthur Sterling stepped aside for me. He retreated into the shadows of the Egyptian stone, a broken man. I took the microphone. The room was silent, the elite of the city waiting for the word of the woman who had just toppled a titan. "Tonight isn't just about the end of a year," I said, my voice echoing off the ancient walls. "It's about the end of an era where arrogance was a currency and integrity was a joke." Arthur Sterling gave me a gift this Christmas that he thought represented my value. But tonight, I've given him a gift that represents his. The truth is, the only thing that survives the winter. I turned to Arthur, who was now being flanked by 2 museum security guards who had been instructed by the board to escort him out. "Happy New Year, Arthur. I hope you kept that water bottle. I hear the water in federal prison is quite standard." The room erupted, not in applause, but in a frantic scramble as the powerful sought to distance themselves from the sinking ship of Sterling and Associates. Arthur was led away, his head bowed, the flashing lights of the Gala now feeling like the flashbulbs of a mugshot. As he was marched past the reflecting pool, he tripped, his expensive shoes slipping on the damp stone, and he fell to his knees in the shallow water. A public humiliation caught on 100 different phone cameras. The king was in the gutter, and the assistant was standing on the summit. I walked out of the museum and into the snowy night, the cold air smelling of freedom and cedar. My bank account was full, my conscience was clear, and for the first time in 5 years, I didn't have to work on Christmas Eve. The cycle of abuse was broken. The power had shifted. As the clock struck midnight somewhere in the distance, I realized that the best gift I ever received wasn't something Arthur gave me. It was the moment I realized I had the power to take everything back.